The chamber was quiet in the way only a place filled with thousands of thoughts could be. No audible noise, yet the air vibrated with the subtle hum of analysis, judgment, and veiled anticipation. Walls of gleaming silver curved overhead, forming a domed fleck with artificial starlight, designed to mimic open skies and remind all species beneath of the vastness they shared. In the center of the council hall, where gravity and politics were equally balanced, stood a single figure in dark navy. Ambassador Lyra Hale had never been more still in her life, not in the years she'd trained under military discipline, nor the dozens of planetary environments she'd adapted to during Earth's extended diplomatic entry into the Intergalactic Council. Stillness was armor. Every breath she took was calculated. Every muscle in her spine aligned with intention. She wasn't just standing, she was anchoring. Around her, at their designated sectors of the circular dais, the representatives of over 49 intelligent species observed her with a spectrum of unreadable expressions. Some blinked with horizontal membranes. Others didn't blink at all. A few clicked mandibles or pulsed bioluminescent patches. But none spoke. They waited for her answer. The delegation from Earth, came the translated voice of Counselor Virex, a long-necked being whose translucent skin shimmered like opal under the hall's light, has presented its treaties and fulfilled the prerequisites for limited member status. Before final acceptance, protocol requires a declaration of apex species. For historical, socio-political, and environmental context, there was no malice in his tone. It was tradition. Every world had an apex, a creature that represented the peak of its ecological dominance. Some were revered, some were feared, others extinct. The question was simple. Lyra's lips curved in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Apex? She repeated softly, her voice amplified for the chamber. We were told this was a symbolic designation. Virex inclined his narrow head. Symbolic, yes, but it shapes our understanding of your species' roots, your psychology, the environment that forged you. A ripple of acknowledgement passed around the chamber. It was the same for all. The apex predator defined the soul of the species. The Red Hari pointed to their sky shriekers, winged titans that hunted in coordinated silence. The Mixel honored their ocean's shadow serpents, blind but never missing their mark. Every delegation had answered the question with pride or sorrow. The recorders had already begun documenting. Lyra's expression remained composed. Inside, she was calculating. She glanced briefly toward the Earth section behind her, for seats filled with aides and cultural liaisons. Dr. Kwan, her evolutionary specialist, gave a barely perceptible nod. Ensign Hadley looked nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. They all knew the script they'd rehearsed. But Lyra also knew something else. There were moments when protocol wasn't enough. This was one of them. She stepped forward a pace. The apex predator of Earth, she said clearly, is human. A pause. Then she raised her right hand. Slowly. Open palm. No aggression. But it landed with seismic weight. The chamber froze. For several seconds, not even the ambient drones whispered. Some alien officials turned toward each other, as if to confirm translation accuracy. One delegate's tendrils recoiled reflexively. Another leaned closer, his irisless eyes narrowing. The silence broke when a low click echoed from the sector of the Zord Dominion, a species known for their strategic minds and disdain for unpredictability. Their representative, Threx, leaned forward, his voice rasping through a translation filter. You mean yourselves? I do, Lyra replied calmly. Homo sapiens. We are the apex of our world. Another delegate, silken-skinned and fluid in movement, gestured with disbelief. What of your tigers? Your ocean hunters? Earth's records mention creatures that kill with tooth and claw. Creatures far faster, stronger. Lyra nodded. Yes, Earth has many lethal species. We hunted them all. Some we revered. Some we drove to extinction. The rest we studied, caged, conserved, but never feared. She lowered her hands slowly. Our ancestors ran them down on foot, before tools, before fire. We didn't outfight them, we outlasted them. That's what humans do. Counselor Virex tilted his translucent skull. But surely your kind has evolved past predation. Yes, Lyra said. And no, we don't kill to eat anymore. Not usually. But the instincts remain. We're apex not just because of what we can do, but because of what we choose not to. More murmurs. Not outrage, just unease. Fascination. Lyra took a breath. Not deep, controlled. You asked for a symbolic designation, she continued. Then consider this. We are the only species on Earth that redefines its predators. We turn threat into resource, challenge into innovation. We don't fear what hunts us, we study it. Then we become something it can't touch. A long-necked diplomat from the outer rim species, whose entire civilization was herbivorous, leaned in with a note of concern. Your history is full of war, internal conflict, mass extinctions. Are you saying you embody those things? Lyra's eyes met his evenly. I'm saying we survived them. And for a moment, the subtle hum of thought in the chamber changed pitch. Not louder, just sharper, focused. Earth is late to your counsel, she continued, but not unprepared. We've watched, learned. We've seen empires fall not from invasion, but from underestimation. From the far side of the circle, the Red Hari ambassador spoke slowly. This is not a boast, it is a warning. Lyra's expression didn't change. No, it's context. That word floated across the chamber like a thread of ice. One syllable, heavy with intention. Virex shifted. The lights under his dais flickering as he interfaced with council systems. Then Earth declares itself both apex and ambassadorial? You wish to represent your kind not with violence, but with voice. Yes, Lyra said, her voice unwavering. But make no mistake. You asked who our apex predator is. You expected a beast, a monster. We are more dangerous than either because we are civilized. There it was, the line, the threshold between fear and respect. The Zorth delegate didn't speak again. Neither did most others. Some began typing silently, transmitting encrypted reports back to their home systems. Others merely watched her, now as if seeing something else. A being standing alone in the center of the universe. Unarmed, and yet no one moved. In her periphery, Lyra saw the Earth team watching her, eyes wide. Hadley's hand had stopped fidgeting. Dr. Kwan looked like someone had just confirmed a theory he'd never dared publish. Lyra turned slightly back to counsel. She bowed her head. Earth awaits your decision. She didn't need to say more. The question had been answered, and the chamber, once again, fell silent. Lyra remained motionless as the council digested her words, their collective silence stretching longer than protocol usually allowed. To many in this room, diplomacy was a careful game of gesture and distance, a choreography of caution and centuries-old restraint. But Earth hadn't been part of their game for very long, and Lyra had no intention of playing by unwritten rules that relied on fear disguised as formality. A slow pulse of pale green light radiated from the center podium. Counselor Virex requesting elaboration. Ambassador Hale, he said, voice perfectly neutral. We asked for clarification. Your declaration is not rejected, but it is unprecedented. Please explain, in your own terms, what justifies humanity's apex status, beyond your own assertion. Her eyes flicked up to the soft hum of the translation drones hovering above. She didn't need to look to know the thousands of observers, diplomats, and analysts on remote feeds were leaning forward. Words would matter here, not to prove anything, but to define the tone of humanity's arrival. I understand your hesitation, she began, stepping into the echoing heart of the chamber. It sounds improbable that a species with no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no hardened shell, could dominate a planet filled with faster, stronger, deadlier creatures. But you misunderstand what dominance means on Earth. It's not about biology. It's about cognition. She raised her hand again, not in a gesture this time, but pointed her own temple. The human brain is our only apex trait. It is both weapon and compass. And it evolved not in times of abundance, but in hardship. We became what we are not because our world was kind, but because it wasn't. Across the circle, a lean, insectoid diplomat from the HYR asked, if intelligence alone were the measure, There are species here that far exceed your recorded history of cognition. Some of us have minds that stretch into hive networks, communal consciousness. Intelligence alone is not a predator's trait. Lyra didn't flinch. True, intelligence alone is insufficient. It's how we apply it. Let me show you who we are, how we became what we did. She paused, then spoke with the rhythm of memory and myth. We were scavengers once. Weak, hairless. We fed off bones after better hunters had their fill. But even then we noticed things. We tracked, watched, learned patterns. We figured out where predators would strike next. We learned to throw stones before we could speak. We learned to plan before we had gods. Our minds adapted, not just to react, but to anticipate. That's the difference. She let those words settle, then stepped forward. Other predators kill because they must. We kill because we choose when. And more importantly, when not to. A shiver of unease passed through the council. Lyra saw it. Not fear exactly, but the dawning recognition that the human capacity for restraint was more chilling than its capacity for violence. She continued, "Consider fire. We didn't just survive it, we mastered it, tamed it, used it to clear forests, to trap animals, to reshape entire landscapes. We changed our diets, our skulls, our social structures. Fire didn't just feed us, it formed us. We are the only species that uses destruction to create civilization." A deep, reverberating voice rose from the delegation of the Uralti, a slow-blooded, long-lived species that had recorded their history for over 80,000 Earth years. And what a balance! Does your dominance allow for harmony with your world? Or did you conquer it the way you claim you have your predators? Lyra's tone cooled slightly. We tried balance. Often we failed. But conquest isn't chaos. It's control. And in that control, we've begun to see the necessity of stewardship, perhaps too late in some cases. But the apex learns. That's the thing we rarely stop doing. Mistakes don't just shape us, they drive us. Now she paced slowly, gaze rotating around the chamber. What other predator preserves the species it once hunted to extinction? We bring back the wolves we once wiped out. We protect the sharks that once made us fear the sea, not because we fear losing power, but because we understand what happens without balance. Our apex is not then a hierarchy, it's a responsibility. Several species shifted uncomfortably at that. Among them, the Varn, a silicon-based intelligence known for their rigid, caste-based survival systems, glanced at one another with glassy, unreadable faces. Lyra didn't need to see their expressions to know the idea of predators restraining themselves for the good of the hunted was foreign. Her voice softened. We don't define apex by brutality or strength. We define it by capability. And capability includes compassion, mercy, patience. These are not natural traits. They are learned. And we learned them in the same world where saber-toothed cats and megasharks thrived. Not because we were better, but because we were determined to survive. She stopped moving, stilling again like at the beginning. The center of a storm she had conjured with nothing more than the truth. You asked who our apex predator is. You expected a creature with fangs, a winged terror, a perfect killer. Instead, you got us flawed, curious, strategic, relentless. A small, rippling murmur ran through the rows of alien delegates, just enough to register in the chamber's atmospheric sensors. Lyra recognized the rhythm. It wasn't dissent. It was interest. Then Vyrek spoke again, slowly. "Ambassador Hale, your account is compelling, but it raises another question. If your kind so clearly claims the apex mantle, what, then, does your species do when it meets another predator? One from beyond Earth?" Lyra smiled faintly, the first true expression she'd allowed since entering the chamber. "That depends," she said. "Do they come with claws raised or a hand outstretched?" There was no bravado in her voice, only quiet certainty. A statement of fact, not threat. Earth had not come to the council with fleets, weapons, or demands. But neither had it come to kneel, a glint of blue on her chest. The Earth insignia, a fragile sphere afloat in a sea of stars, seemed almost aglow in the sterile light. The council didn't reply immediately. But she could feel the shift, a mental pivot. They no longer wondered if humans were qualified. Now, they wondered what it meant to have them at the table. And Lyra, standing there in the eye of a galactic storm, knew she had not just spoken for Earth. She had defined it. Lyra stood at the center of the chamber like a fixed star, while gravity seemed to bend ever so slightly toward her. The council had not moved. No votes cast, no verdict delivered. And yet, the atmosphere had changed, as though a curtain had been pulled back and something long feared had been revealed. Not a monster, not a conqueror, a human composed, articulate, and terrifying in her restraint. Behind her, data analysts on the Earth delegation team were already processing dozens of intercepted pulse threads, nonverbal communiques exchanged between alien diplomats in real time. Most weren't hostile, but none were comfortable. Earth had been received, yes, but not welcomed. She could feel their questions pressing inward like invisible pressure. What would humanity do here? Would they adapt, assimilate, or worse, infect a fragile balance with their unpredictable ambition? Her earpiece buzzed softly. Council subthread request from the Zorth envoy. Hadley murmured in a tight whisper. Private dialogue. He wants 5 minutes. Lyra nodded once and turned. A curved beam of light traced an arc toward the designated subchamber, an isolated discussion pod, suspended just above the main floor. She ascended the narrow walkway alone, her posture unyielding, not aggressive, but solid. Threx awaited her inside. He was taller than most, with slate-gray skin stretched taut across a ridged skull. Zorth expressions were nearly imperceptible to human eyes, but Lyra had studied him enough to recognize the subtle tension in his upper carapace and the way his two secondary hands folded under his primary arms, a mark of defensive curiosity. Ambassador Hale, he said without pleasantries. I requested this audience to address a concern. I'm listening. You speak of dominance with eloquence, but there's an unease among the council, one that cannot be soothed by rhetoric alone. He tilted his head. Your species speaks of empathy, and yet you test weapons meant to scorch atmospheres. You colonize your own moon for resources. You build machines capable of destroying yourselves 100 times over. That is not apex. That is instability. Lyra didn't blink. We never claimed to be perfect, just dangerous, and aware of it. Awareness does not prevent violence. No, she agreed, but denial guarantees it. Threx studied her in silence, then activated projection in the space between them. A holographic globe appeared, Earth, rendered in spectral light. Flashpoints pulsed across it. Wars, environmental collapses, acts of desperation and brilliance alike. This, he said, is your legacy. You offer the council your intelligence, your adaptability, but behind that offer lies volatility. Lyra stepped closer to projection, eyes narrowing slightly. You see chaos, she said. I see resilience. Those lights? They're not just sites of conflict. They're also places where we rebuilt, where we evolved under pressure no other species in your council has had to endure. We were forged in entropy. You're only seeing the scars, not what they taught us. Threx's gaze sharpened. Then answer me this. If your species is so civilized, why do your own fear you? Lyra didn't look away. Because we're honest with ourselves. We know what we're capable of. We've been our own worst enemy. But that's the reason we've survived. Because we've had to face our darkness. We didn't hide it under tradition or genetic obedience. We confronted it, and we're still confronting it. She paused, voice quieting but gaining weight. No one's ever feared us more than we fear ourselves. That's why we're dangerous. Not because we're reckless, but because we've learned restraint the hard way. Threx said nothing for several long seconds. Then, slowly, he dimmed the projection. You are not like the others. No, Lyra said. We're not. He gave the faintest nod, an acknowledgement, not of agreement, but understanding. The subchamber dissolved its privacy field, and the walkway relit, allowing her to return. Back in the main hall, murmurs had returned. The tone had shifted from skepticism to strategy. Earth was no longer a curiosity. It was a variable, unpredictable, and therefore powerful. Some, she knew, would seek alliance. Others would hedge against risk, but none would forget what she'd said. She reached her station again and gave Hadley a sidelong glance. Status. The Nuvex contingent wants to open scientific exchange channels. The Mixel sent a direct query about cultural mapping protocols. And the Varn, well, they locked their network, which is apparently a good sign. Lyra nodded. That's progress. Dr. Kwan leaned forward. You realize what just happened, right? They don't see us as fledglings anymore. No, Lyra said. Now they see us as peers. And that's always more dangerous. There was a flicker of light from the central column, an indicator that a new motion had been raised. Not for a vote yet, but for a public response. The council chamber dimmed, and a new voice emerged. It came from the elderly, a species so old, so advanced, that they rarely spoke in live sessions. Their representative was a being of radiant, shifting form. Light and particulate matter held in tension. When it spoke, the sound was not processed through translation tech, but resonated directly in the minds of those present. We have heard the human, it intoned. We have measured our species not only by threat, but by purpose. And we ask now, what is that purpose? Why does a predator seek a seat among the cooperative? Every eye turned back to Lyra. It was a question that mattered most. Not who they were, not what they had done, but why they were here. She stepped forward once more. Because we spent too long learning what it means to survive alone, she said. Now we're ready to understand what it means to survive together. Another pause, pregnant and perfect. But do not mistake our desire for unity as weakness. We didn't come here to bow. We came to contribute, and to ensure that if danger comes from beyond, you'll want us on your side. That final line settled like a stone in still water. The elderly pulsed once, then slowly receded, saying nothing more. The moment had passed, but the mark had been left. There would be debate, resistance, perhaps even covert surveillance. But no one would look at Earth the same way again. And Lyra, standing tall in the silence, understood that the greatest predators didn't need to bare their teeth. They only needed to smile and stand still. The final vote was scheduled at orbital dusk. The chamber dimmed to mimic the passage of time across most habitable worlds. Symbolism ran deep in the council's architecture. Light represented deliberation, darkness decision, a ritual designed to frame consensus as an inevitability, as though the stars themselves conferred legitimacy. Lyra Hale stood at her designated post, arms folded neatly behind her back, face unreadable. The stillness around her was not silence. It was expectation, held taut like a cord between shifting centers of gravity. To an outsider, she might have appeared calm. But beneath that practiced posture, her thoughts moved like a weather system, layered, strategic, storm-churned. The screen before her listed the current tallies. Not votes yet, but the non-binding preliminary alignments. A majority of blocks leaned toward conditional approval, a limited seat observer status, with elevated diplomatic influence. Not full council membership, but the first true step, a foothold, a hand on the door. Notably, the Varn and Zorith blocks had abstained, as expected. They respected strength but distrusted instability. That made Earth, with its war-torn history and volatile potential, a paradox they couldn't yet afford to accept or reject. Still, abstention wasn't opposition. It was observation. And that meant possibility. Anything we should worry about? Hadley murmured. Just behind her, Lyra didn't turn. Only everything. But that's diplomacy. Dr. Kwan chuckled softly, though the tension in his eyes hadn't faded since Section 3. You realize, he said, that no one here really knows what we are yet. They will, Lyra said. A new voice, rich and unfamiliar, cut through the chamber. We request recognition of a secondary address. Unscheduled. The voice belonged to Orin Vallis, representative of the Inyari Ascendancy, a species with no known military, but vast economic influence across 6 galaxies. Their kind rarely spoke in council, choosing instead to let markets and trade algorithms argue on their behalf. For Vallis to speak now was unexpected. The chamber granted the request. Orin rose from his dais, skin luminous like polished stone. His gaze passed across the chamber slowly, deliberately, before coming to rest on Lyra. The human has spoken of capability, he began, and of restraint. She has spoken of intelligence forged in hardship, and of the apex not as a weapon, but as a burden. These are sentiments we recognize. But there is one more question the Council must consider before extending its trust. He paused, letting his words settle like sediment in water. Does Earth seek power or protection? A murmur rippled to the chamber like wind over dry leaves. Lyra didn't wait for protocol to summon her. She stepped forward, voice steady. We seek neither. Or rather, both, because one without the other is meaningless. Valis raised a brow. Explain. She let the silence hang a moment longer than was polite. We don't fear power. We understand it too well. We've had it, we've abused it, and we've paid for it. So we know what it can cost. And we don't ask for protection because we believe strength must be earned, not gifted. Then she looked directly at him, unflinching. But we do want a future. And we know that no species survives in isolation forever. Protection and power, in the right hands, serve the same end. Survival without tyranny. That's what we're here for. Not to dominate, not to beg, but to endure together. Valis said nothing, but gave a slow nod. Not of agreement, of acknowledgement. And then he sat. The central chamber lights dimmed again, signifying transition to vote. Counselor Virex rose, his long limbs unfolding like a ribbon of water through the podium's light. We proceed to confirm Earth's provisional status, he announced. Observer with elevated privileges. Non-binding advisory seat. To be reviewed after one cycle. As the votes began to populate the chamber's holoscreen, Lyra felt a strange absence within herself, like breath held too long. She wasn't nervous. Not exactly. She was aware, alive, the way soldiers felt in the seconds before movement. That crystalline tension of not knowing which direction the world would tilt. One by one, blocks illuminated. Green for approval, yellow for neutral abstention, red for dissent. And slowly, like stars blooming across a night sky, the green lights overtook the map, not unanimously, but undeniably. The motion passed. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A soft tone signaled a change in Earth's council status. The crest of humanity, blue and white against a void black field, rose in its designated place on the council's center display, no longer gray but now burning faintly gold. The moment was brief, but irreversible. We are in, Hadley whispered, as if daring the words to be true. Dr. Quan stared at the projection in silence, the weight of history forming behind his eyes. They won't forget today. No, Lyra said, turning slowly from the central display. But that's the point. Behind her, the chamber began to shift. Conversations igniting, sideline discussions forming, alliances recalibrating. Earth's status was no longer a hypothetical. It was a variable in every strategic equation now. She moved toward the exit arch, head high, in the corridor beyond the chamber. The artificial gravity was slightly lighter, less oppressive, easier to think. She welcomed the change. It reminded her of how fast things could change when you force them to look at you differently. Ambassador Hale, came a voice from behind. She turned. It was Threx again, his eyes reflective under the corridor's dim light. You played your hand well, he said. I didn't play, she replied. I told the truth. He studied her for a moment, then offered something rare for his kind, a gesture of open hands. Not surrender. Respect. The galaxy is watching now, he said. Let them, she answered. We didn't raise our hand to threaten them. We raised it, so they'd see we were no longer beneath them. As Threx nodded and walked away, Lyra glanced once more toward the council chamber, where Earth's symbol now hovered among the stars. A smile tugged at the edge of her mouth, quiet, dangerous, and very human. Let them wonder what it meant. Let them remember who raised her hand.